All right, we're going to call the February 26th study session in session. Let's do our call to order. City Clerk.
Mayor Pro Tem Wall.
Here.
Mayor Woodard.
Present.
Councilmember Doyle. Councilmember Page.
Here.
Councilmember Sonmore. Here. Councilmember Matsumoto Wright. And Councilmember Murray asked to be excused.
Do we have please.
Move to excuse Councilmember Murray.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none. Vote to approve. Say yay.
Aye.
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 Any noes? Any abstain? And she is excused for the evening. We will now move to general public comment. Do we have any general public in person or online?
No one online, but we have two who signed up in person, and I'll read the protocol first.
Perfect, thank you.
The city welcomes general public comments at the beginning of council work sessions and meetings, and comments on particular agenda items at the time they are discussed. Public comments are for the official record. Council does not respond to comments or questions during this time. Address the council as a whole, and comments shall pertain to topics, not individual council members, staff, or audience members. Limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes. The clerk will terminate comments beyond this allotted time, or if there's a violation of these guidelines. Written comments received will be added to the official record, but will not be read aloud. All right, give me just one moment. Dale Jeremiah, you'll have 5 minutes at the podium.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you, Mayor Woodard and fellow council members. 115 years ago, Seattle opened the Hiawatha Community Center in West Seattle. Last weekend, there was a blue ribbon cutting ceremony for its grand reopening after an extensive renovation, which included structural stabilization, seismic upgrades, new electrification system, and interior refurbishments. This project cost $7,500,000. This center does not have a pool, and it's only 17,500 square feet. Now, 2 years ago, the city published this document here, which is the facilities condition assessment. And the consultant's report determined that replacement costs for all the equipment and a roof for the pavilion was $2,380,990. So for discussion purposes tonight, let's assume that the consultant's figures were for material, so I'll round it up to $5 million to include installation. And I'll add $2 million for upgrades of expansion, but without altering the distinct hexagon shape. So now we're at $7 million. So that's just 10% of a new facility. Now we learned last month that servicing a debt of our $12 million city hall costs the average homeowner $80 a year. So servicing a $7 million debt should be less than $60 a year with a levy rate of just a dime. So I'm suggesting let's find out what the renovation would cost. Let's get bids from companies that will actually do the work, not consultants. Now, yes, the pavilion could be closed for a year or so. So during that time, the city could lease the vacant U.S. Bank building right across the street for kids' crew and dance and fitness classes. Now, there is an elephant in the room in the missing financial sustainability discussions, is the pavilion. The pavilion is a white elephant, a valuable but burdensome possession. And even in its current condition, a third-party operator may not even want to be involved. Now, our city has had a long history of partnerships with private third parties. Examples are Waste Management, Comcast, and Puget Sound Energy. So I'm suggesting if the cost of $7 million is realistic for the needed renovation, put it on the ballot, and we'll find out if that expense is something our taxpayers are willing to support. Thank you.
Next is Danny Vega. You'll have 5 minutes at the podium.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, and neighbors. My name is Daniel Vega. I'm a Mountlake Terrace resident, a graduate of Mountlake Terrace High School, and now a senior in urban planning at the University of Washington. Tonight, I'm here to share a capstone project I'm working on that involves our city directly. It's called Achy Meadow Train Melody America, and by June, I hope to answer this particular research question. Can a community engagement approach facilitate the production of train melodies for an American metro system? First, what even are train melodies to begin with? In short, they're 7-second pieces of music that play as passengers board and exit trains. Japan pioneered them after World War II, evolving from grating monotone-sounding bells, think the sound of an Amber Alert on your phone, and transforming them into pieces of music. And here's the kicker. Most stations have their own audible identity. One station might play John Denver's Country Roads, while the next might play, a famous commercial jingle. Now, why should Mountlake Terrace care about all this? Because of our own Link Light Rail. The passenger information systems on board, think the now entering announcement, the digital signage in the hallway, they fail, not occasionally, often. It's a documented issue with the agency's reliability. My proposal to Sound Transit is rather simple. Bring these melodies to the US and broadcast them on the platform itself. So come hell or high water, as soon as those doors open, you'll hear a recognizable tune, and you'll know exactly where you are within a transit system, even if every screen you see on board is black. But here's the thing. That melody won't just be a wayfinding tool, it'll be the first impression for visitors. It'll be the sound that defines our city for anyone arriving by train. And right now, our city is actively working on a brand, an identity that truly reflects who we are. So this isn't just about transit, it's about placemaking. Here's another catch. Music, as we know, is inherently subjective. I love the Beach Boys, I think they're the greatest band in the world. If it were up to me, our station melody would play God Only Knows on repeat, or worse, the O'Reilly Auto Parts jingle. Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? The O'Reilly, right? Auto parts, right? All right, so rather than let Sound Transit or myself unilaterally decide what sounds like Mountlake Terrace, which could land anywhere on the spectrum from beautiful to unbearable, I kind of want to flip that idea on its head. How? By letting people who live, work, play, and love this city vote on it themselves. I commissioned a composer, someone who experienced train melodies firsthand in Japan, to create 3 original pieces inspired by our city's identity. 1 jazz melody honoring our deep jazz tradition and award-winning high school program, 1 rock and roll melody reflecting our 1950s founding era, and of course 1 electronic melody, a faithful adaptation of what you would hear on Japanese railways themselves. Now I have these melodies, and now I had to figure out, how to reach people. Will I rock up to a city council meeting, for instance? Yeah, I'm here, aren't I? But I'm using this project to test a more equitable form of community engagement rooted in the interpersonal philosophies of researcher Chelsea Lee. She identifies what she calls the usual suspects of public participation: older, male, longtime residents, and homeowners. Their voices absolutely matter, but they're not the entire picture. Think about the shift workers who are working presently, like at the library right now, not standing where I am today. People who work in Mountlake Terrace but have been priced out of living here, or young people, renters, people who feel that their physical distance from City Hall means they don't have a say. In order to capture their voices, I simply have to meet them where they already are. I've designed a short 5-minute survey available in English and Spanish so that anyone who lives, works, or spends time in the city can vote on what our station should sound like. Last weekend, I started reaching out to our quote-unquote community contacts, places like Double D Meats, Diamond Knot Brew Pub, and Urban City Coffee. These are some of the trusted gathering spots our comprehensive plan identifies. You'll find survey flyers at those local businesses and others all over town. And this Saturday, at 11 a.m., I'll be tabling at the Mountlake Terrace Library in tandem with a community event. I'm also working with Sound Transit to get approval to recreate this Achy Meadow process on the Mountlake Terrace station platform itself, so commuters can hear the melodies live during their daily routine and vote right there on the spot. For those tuning in live here, all you have to do is go on your phone and visit the official Mountlake Terrace Facebook group or our local subreddit, or simply keep an eye out for these flyers during your daily routines. A survey is waiting for you there, but I still have more places to post and more conversations to have. If you prefer to talk in person, want a link to the voting form or then some, please reach out to me directly at dvga@uw.edu. That's D as in Danny, V as in Vega, G as in Garcia, A as in Alderete, at uw.edu. Your voice matters. Everyone has a right to their city. Through your perspective, I can channel our collective will into a formal proposal to Sound Transit by the summertime season. So keep an eye out for these flyers wherever you shop, live, or enjoy yourself, or open up your phones right now and vote. And hey, wouldn't it be pretty nice after a long day of work to come home to a sound that you helped create? I'd like to think so. Thank you very much.
That
feel like
concludes public comment.
I feel like we can just go home. But we've got more to do. Thank you all for your comments and your vision. We're going to move to 4 now, which is a presentation on the Fiscal Sustainability Taskforce recommendation, and that's with our Deputy City Manager, Carolyn Hope. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. I'll start off for the first couple slides. We're going to have several different presenters tonight. So first, we'll bring that up on the screen so everybody can see. There we go. So just introducing the Fiscal Sustainability Task Force. This was a project that we identified several years ago that we wanted to undertake in order to be proactive about how we address upcoming budget challenges and do so in a way that had robust community input and engagement in the process. So tonight, we will have that presentation by members of the task force along with our consultant that helped us through a lot of these challenges. No, that's fine. There we go. Okay. So tonight you'll see the agenda for our presentation, introduction and overview, and then the purpose of the financial task force and the work to date, what strategies were considered in order to address the upcoming challenges, the community engagement process we went through with not only the task force members, but also online and in-person open houses and discussions, the final recommendations, and then what implementation and next steps might look like, and concluding remarks, and we'll be happy to answer any questions after that. I wanted to introduce a few folks tonight, and the first group is the participants of the task force themselves. I am very thankful that these folks up on the screen spent their time and dedicated their time to not only learn about how public budgeting works, but also really consider all the options that were presented to them and put together a package that I think it's fair to say that nobody liked, but that everybody saw that was something that could address the challenges that we have going forward. With that, these are the members of the group, the staff group that worked on this project. Steve Toller and Michael Perkins with Baker Tilly helped us. They have a vast amount of experience doing this type of process all over the country. And then myself and Carolyn helped quite a bit with that, along with Sarah Kay, our finance director, and Sienna, our communications and community engagement manager. So with that, I'd like to invite Steve and Michael up, and they can run through the next few pieces of this, giving you an overview on what the fiscal challenges will be in the years ahead. Thank you. So turn it over to you guys.
Good evening, everybody. I got the chair that's really low, so that's all right. I've been told I'm a frog on a lily pad sometimes, but that's okay. So anyways, it's wonderful to see you all again. And I want to just briefly go over kind of really what the task force was really needing to accomplish, right? And it all started with the fiscal challenge that you're in. But before I do, if you just give me just the 30 seconds or so, I got to tell you, this group of 15 people that you all put on this task force were stellar. They were beyond my expectations and my hopes that we would see as y'all were coming up with this idea. And in the course of the last 10 years that I've been doing this type of work, this truly was one of the best groups that I've ever worked with. And so I am going to turn around and I want to thank all of you that were participated in this. You gave so much effort and time and invested so much into making this, hopefully, will give you success in terms of informing your decision about how to address the gap that you have. And so I just wanted to take a moment to just give my kudos to all of you that are in the room and those of you that are either online or were not able to be here tonight. So with that, what were we trying to do, right? And it really is reminding you of the presentation that I gave you back in July, and then followed up with an update with that in October, which is the fiscal challenge that you have. You do have a structural gap between the revenues that are projected over the next 10 years and the expenditures in which you're spending to provide the services that you're providing to the community. And in order to address that gap, it is going to take a good partnership between yourselves as the decision makers, your staff, and of course the community in terms of how to address that gap through either a combination of expenditure reductions or revenue enhancements to address that. And so I showed these pictures to you back in July and updated them in October based on the mid-year review, as well as the proposed budget amendments that you all approved. I think it was in November or so timeframe. But basically, your general fund shows that there is a gap between revenues and expenses, and that's about $4 million through 2030, and it increases to about $5.4 million if you look at the full 10-year horizon. And your reserves would fall below your minimum reserve goal, which is the minimum reserve goal that we talked with you about back in July and in October, was establishing a goal of 20% of annual operating costs. But that minimum reserve threshold is the absolute bare bottom of where you would want to be, and that is your current reserve policy, which is not to fall below 5% of annual operating costs. And I mentioned that to you before, is that is so low that you really need to look at establishing a more realistic reserve level to make sure it can carry you through the various financial and economic storms that we end up going through. And so the question is, what is it going to take to address that gap? And this is what I presented to you, which is that it would take about $4 million in ongoing new strategies that would continue, right? So $4 million per year by 2027, and then an additional $2.3 million phased in over 3 years starting in 2030 that would address the gap and allow you over the next 10 years to ensure that your reserves did not fall below that minimum threshold of the 5% of annual operating costs, but that would strive to achieve getting those reserves to what should really be a more realistic goal based on your revenue mix of about 20% of annual operating costs. And that is what this picture worth 1,000 words here, that really tells that story. The question is the how, right? The so what, now what? Okay, now what do we do, right? And to address that, you pulled together this incredible task force to help inform some of that. So I'm going to turn over to Michael to talk about how we went through the process of really helping to facilitate the conversation that this group owned and ran with that formed ultimately a consensus recommendation to you. So Michael.
Thank you, Steve. So as you're all aware, the purpose of this task force was to examine the general fund condition facing the city that Steve had just highlighted and come up with a recommended set of budget strategies that would put the city on a path of fiscal sustainability. And to do that, they evaluated a broad range of budget strategies and zeroed in on the ones that they thought would be the most likely to be successfully implemented and also have the correct volume of fiscal impact to actually address the fiscal challenges facing the city. And they, in addition to the deliberations that they had amongst themselves, which were robust, this also involved soliciting input from the broader community through a public engagement process that you'll also hear about momentarily. This process began back in the summer with the task force doing a deep dive into municipal finance, understanding how city services are funded, understanding the historical context around Mountlake Terrace's specific fiscal challenges. And with that base of knowledge, then engaging with the potential budget strategies and having the deliberations about, different trade-offs and different perspectives on which ones might be most effective, which trade-offs are, livable, and which ones are maybe unacceptable. And Steve touched on this, but with that, I do want to take a moment myself to commend the task force members, not only for the sense of ownership and the sense of responsibility toward their community that they showed just in giving their time and their energy to this process, but in also how earnestly and thoughtfully they engaged with the process and engaged with one another. The conversations that we had around the potential, different possible recommendations were often robust and involved, differing perspectives. But something that really characterized this whole process and stood out for me was how much every member of the task force, how sincere and respectful they were in articulating their perspectives and also in hearing the perspectives of the other task force members, and how thoughtful and respectful they were in getting to a point of consensus around the ultimate recommended set of budget strategies. So definitely want to take a moment myself to commend the task force members on how they engaged with this process. So that set of budget strategies that will be part of the recommendation that the task force will present to you in a moment essentially fell into four main categories. So expenditure controls and cost shifts, meaning shifting costs away from the general fund. Service delivery changes, meaning delivering services in a more cost-effective manner, but not necessarily changing the service level. Revenue enhancements, generating revenue. And finally, service level reductions or eliminations. And then in the next couple of slides, we lay out, what are all the potential strategies that were discussed in those four different categories. And I'm not going to take time to run through each one of those, but I'll just take a moment to say that broad range of strategies that was considered by the task force was developed through a process of interviewing city staff, council members, Baker Tilly's own subject matter experts who've done this work in other municipalities and kind of have seen what works and what doesn't. That was the process of putting together the sort of broad range of potentially viable strategies that the task force considered, and then they did the work of really digging into each, evaluating the potential for success, the fiscal impact and the trade-offs involved, and deliberating amongst themselves to come up with what they thought was the best recommended set of strategies for you all to consider. And with that, I will give it over to Sienna to talk through the community engagement process. Or Carolyn, sorry.
All right, so many of the council members attended these meetings. Thank you for being there. We had two, we had two public meetings on January 13th and 14th. One was by Zoom, and one was in person here at City Hall. And in both cases, we provided a lengthy, informative presentation and provided an opportunity for breakout discussions with our Fiscal Sustainability Task Force members and staff to answer questions and ask how the community felt about the different proposals before them. We also had an opportunity online for people to watch that presentation and see the PDF version of that presentation and then answer a quick poll on their preferences. So I guess I just went through that, but we had presentation, discussion, and report out. So some of the themes that we heard collectively from all of those resources were that largely folks acknowledge the fiscal challenges that the city is facing and that we need action. There was a strong preference for the preferred budget strategy package. They cited it as less regressive. There was broad support for property tax banked capacity using that strategy, and protecting core services and continuing investment in recreation services. There were concerns expressed about the Metropolitan Park District governance and cost implications, the elimination of the police services commander position, and the transportation benefit district license fee increase. And with that, we're going to hand it over to our task force members to talk about their recommendations. Sure. Oh, do you want me to do that? Oh, yeah, sorry. Great. So just, so the guiding principles that the task force were using as they considered all of the different options before them were, one, we need to take action to address the structural deficit. So that means we have to look at things like the timeline, the significance of the expense, and so forth. There was a commitment to maintain core services, which are valued, the services that are valued by the community, to prioritize equity and affordability in the solutions proposed, and to use existing revenue capacity before introducing new burdens to the community, to stabilize and rebuild our financial reserves, as we just heard from Steve, and to balance short-term actions with long-term solutions, and ensure transparency and ongoing community engagement. All right, Ellen. Oh yeah, they were supposed to talk about community engagement. Sorry.
Glad we could be here. Thanks for having us.
Which group's next?
No, you know, if I can jump in, it was so important that these two were involved with all those community engagement components. I would love to have them share their perspectives on what they heard during that community engagement, and kind of what ultimately led them to the preferred, you know, budget strategy packages that are coming before you. So why don't you guys go ahead and take a few minutes to talk through that.
Hello to the council, Mayor Pro Tem. Yes, we definitely, it was important for us to be involved with the community outreach meetings and give a rationale for why we came up with the budget strategies that we did. And I think that although we didn't have as much of a turnout as obviously we all always hoped for, the online community meeting, there was 11 community members. And of course, when we say community members, we're not counting the fiscal sustainability people who are also community members. So there, and council members are obviously also community members. So in all, there was 19 people, and then some city staff, some which may be community members, I'm not sure. And I was not there for the online, but it seems like maybe people were a bit shy about saying what they thought of things because only one person opted for option one and everyone else just didn't say what they were interested in. But Danny was at the online meeting, so maybe you can say more about what you think about what happened there.
The online one was interesting. There was 11 folks from the community there. The first session I got into, I think people were a little bit shy, especially being over Zoom. Maybe people aren't used to it, and the community member actually dropped off. So getting into the second one, there were some questions about what happened, how we came up with decisions, you know, why is this affecting Mountlake Terrace? And I think kudos to the staff on the presentation, going deep into why we were in the situation where we were. The Zoom meeting and also the in-person one the next day, I think reflected the feedback that we got was very good on. They understood why we were in this budget situation. I don't think that was a question from everybody. The feedback we got was more along the lines of, can we have some additional details on how some of the difficult things went? The slide that Carolyn went over at the MPD especially is pretty heavy subject matter where people had difficulty understanding what the differences were, and a lot of questions around that. But I think by and large, the feedback I got from the community, especially in the online one, was they understood why we were like this. They appreciated that the city was taking proactive action to get ahead of this and have a task force in place. And then that was, yeah, kind of the online and the in-person wrapped up in one.
And yeah, I think the in-person one, which I was able to be present at and had a group, I had 2 community members, myself, another task force person, and one of the council members. And there was a lot of questions, I think, from people about what is bank capacity, because it's so complicated. I'm not sure I 100% understand it. And of course, the MPD was a huge question and a very big part of the discussion. And I think moving forward, that will be a very important separate discussion to have with the community, because nobody wants to spend more money, but it seems like everyone I talk to wants the pavilion and they want a pool. So I think it's money well worth spent, but, and I think that the community members think so too. And one comment I thought was really quite adorable, and I can't remember if it was online or somebody in person, said that they don't want to pay more taxes, but they were okay with increasing the bank capacity because they love the city. And I just thought that kind of sums it up for a lot of people, I think, because you get what you pay for, right? And I think that was the consensus of how people felt. And it seemed like there was also lots of support to make sure that we retain our core services and that we retain the police commander position, which seemed like a pretty big deal to everyone, and that also we avoid taxes that will affect low-income folks in the city, such as the car registration tax. So that was a pretty big deal. Yeah.
I think one last comment on the overall process and the community engagement piece was, well, Steve and Michael kind of mentioned the way that people engage each other with respect, and by and large, that I felt the same thing from the community. The community members that showed up had questions, they dug in, they wanted to know what things were, why we made these decisions, but there was never a point where I felt anybody came from anything other than, I guess, a position where they wanted to understand, and there was, which is not always the case today. You feel like things are a little bit combative at points, but budgets, especially when the city is in the position they're in, can lead to a point where there's some tensions. And the community members were fantastic. The ones that showed up, asked questions, wanted to understand, and I mean, the task force was on board for it.
Yeah, I think overall it was really great, and I think that more meetings are definitely important to have with the community going forward, including reaching out to communities that normally maybe don't show up at City Hall. I think that's really, really, really super important.
Got a microphone somewhere. So next we'll go ahead and bring up Eric and Ian, talk about the budget strategies. We already had that screen up. We'll put it back up now.
Looks like we have a question, Councilmember Page.
Yeah, I have a question for the city regarding the online meetings or the in-person meetings. Were any of those recorded and saved on YouTube, similar to our meetings?
Yeah, they were.
Okay.
And I believe it's on the finance website. If not, we can certainly send out a link. Task Force website.
So we have the mechanisms then to see how many more people actually saw the meetings,
Yeah.
other than just the 19 people.
Yeah, we can
Okay.
track the views for sure. Yeah.
So my name is Eric Notevet. This is the preferred budget strategy package. The items that are all in black here are consistent actually between both packages. The item that's in blue is the one that will change a little bit in the other package, and there are some other changes you'll see on the next page. But running down here, the first one we started with were our various expenditure controls that to the task force felt maybe like some low-hanging fruit, maybe is a good way to put it. The first one is to update the internal cost allocation plan. So that is costs that are allocated out of the general fund to various departments. I believe it was told us that that has been due for review anyway for a little bit. And so that would have a fiscal impact there. Similarly, reducing redundant ERP software subscriptions. So this is unused software licenses, things like that that are no longer in use and could be phased out for some savings. In a similar fashion, eliminating historical budgetary savings assumptions, basically finding areas where we have traditionally saved a little bit versus budget and proactively taking those savings as a result. And now we get into some more ones. So the reduced general fund expenditures by 10%, or I'm sorry, by 5%. This was a big point of discussion. This is the point at which there is actually maybe some cuts involved, and there was a lot of discussion how large this should be. There was I can't remember if it was one or a few slides that right now that was shown to the task force that showed, as I recall, 5% and 10%. And the 5% felt like an area that the task force was comfortable with in terms of what areas of services would be impacted and things like that. Doesn't make it maybe the most pleasant thing, but it was a area that we were comfortable. 10% we started to cut into areas that everybody was less comfortable with. And so we started to look then at other options once we got to that point, because we decided 5% was about as much as we were comfortable going, with the idea that it's not 5% across the board, right? It's 5% between the areas that are not more non-core services, because things like the police, for example, are a different thing than a lot of other services. As far as revenue then, we have the fleet and equipment maintenance revenue that we get with Shoreline. This has to do with the rate increase from 2024 was kind of due for a revisit, a conversation anyway. And so there is an opportunity for some rate increase as our own costs essentially associated with that have increased. The rate, increasing the rate that we are charging for them would be appropriate, basically. Now, here we get to the banked capacity. In this plan, we would use 100% of the banked capacity. This felt like an important way to close the gap. As you can see, it's the largest closure measure on the screen right now. This plan was largely chosen as the preferred budget package using 100% because it was viewed, and this was mentioned a little bit earlier, this was viewed as a less regressive way to bring in revenue once we've hit the point where we think we can no longer expenditure control, cut, or things like that our way out of the problem. We're going to have to also get other revenue to address the remainder of the problem. This felt like a way we could close significant portion of the remaining gap in as least of a aggressive way as we possibly could. The next one is the Transportation Benefit District sales tax. This would be one was discussed a lot. It is a 0.3% increase to the sales tax that is allowed as a part of the Transportation Benefit District that already exists. I am trying to remember what that would bring us up to, and I don't have that number in front of me, I'm realizing, but it is a 0.3% increase, basically. And then the last one was mentioned earlier, which was the Metropolitan Parks District. This was maybe the largest point of discussion when we were trying to figure out what was appropriate. Trying to figure out what to do about the fact that Parks and Recreation are a significant and important part of life in Mountlake Terrace to a lot of us. Every member of the task force was very not even referring to just the recreation center and pavilion, which is an important thing, but just the fact that the Parks and Rec is in itself takes a lot of money out of the general fund as a part of its measure. The idea was this would carve out that into its own entity, so to speak, reducing the pressure on the general fund itself. Now, what it doesn't show up here is the preference of the task force was to have that Metropolitan Parks District start originally as a Mountlake Terrace only Parks District, with the option to expand it further and maybe realize additional cost savings and potentially help then at that point start to pay for the replacement rec center or however we address that problem. But there are obviously discussions with other municipalities and things like that would need to happen at that point. And so that was a bigger thing that we thought, but it seemed like a good idea to help address the actual pressure on the general fund itself to carve out this Metropolitan Parks District, let essentially the parks take care of themselves a bit more from a taxing authority. I'm not sure, maybe that's a good way to put how we were kind of viewing that.
All right. Hi, my name is Ian Tucker. I'm going to cover the alternative strategy. The big thing I want to say on the alternative strategy is you have a task force, you expect us to come out with a recommendation. We're coming out with 2, which is a little odd. That's because the task force did recognize that there's things in both packages that might not necessarily happen. It's outside of council's control, voter-approved measures, for example. And candidly, we originally, when we were going through and creating our first budget strategy, we only had bank capacity at 50%. And then the further we got along, we realized we're not going to hit our target. So in the alternative package, the first change you'll probably see is the second item in blue. Bank capacity is dropped to 75%. The reason for that is to then give council an option in case one of the other measures doesn't pass. You then have that additional 25% capacity to fall back on if additional revenue doesn't come in. The other 2 options also have, as have been pointed out, are relatively unpopular, but we did feel they were the best options available to us, and that was increasing the license fee on vehicles from $20 to $40, and the elimination of the police command services position. Those are essentially the 2 measures that we had the most disagreement on, but were still the most favored amongst all the members of the group. When it comes to the police commander services position specifically, one thing we were all very cognizant of is city employees and employees in any organization are not just numbers to be cut, these are people. So when it came to if we are going to have to make staffing cuts, well, what's a position that might not necessarily, it's not putting someone out on the street, if I were. The police commander services position is scheduled for retirement sometime in the next few years. So that isn't necessarily putting someone out on the street, as simply not backfilling a position as it becomes available. And with that, I think I'll pass it back over. Thank you all for your time today and for having the forethought to put this entire task force together.
As the numbers guy, what I'll basically say is that, we use the dynamic dashboard financial forecast as the task force was going through this, to understand as they were starting to talk through what are the strategies that they wanted to bring forward as recommended, would it solve the gap? Because remember, we had, $4 million that was needed by 27 plus another $2+ million by 2030 phased in over 3 years that was required, right? I mean, $6 million is what we were going to need. And so this basically just paints the picture that in both the case of the preferred gap, as well as the preferred strategy, as well as the alternate strategy, both of those strategy packages that they provided to you as part of their consensus recommendation would solve the gap. And it keeps you reserves just at that minimum threshold of the 5%, which is not ideal, but helps to make sure that you can grow those back by the 10-year forecast to that preferred goal, which is the 20% of annual operating costs. And so ultimately, the packages that they've shared with you tonight will both address what you need to do to be able to solve the gap and make you fiscally sustainable for the long haul. Okay? And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jeff to kind of talk with you about what is the next steps and how these might be implemented. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So just wanted to outline our roles and responsibilities going forward. This is your first touch on this topic officially, and so there could be some future discussions and work sessions to continue the conversation amongst the council. But ultimately, the role of the City Council is to make a decision on how to move forward with fiscal sustainability. And so we'll be able to review and discuss and deliberate these ideas over the next couple of months. And the role of our staff is to, of course, support the City Council in answering questions, providing additional information if you need it, organizing community engagement opportunities, and then, of course, implementing your decisions. So just a few important dates to think about with these proposals, if you choose to go forward with them. One, we will be hosting some public meetings about the budget in April and May. So council, if you can make a decision before then, that's great. If you can't, because there's still some feedback you want to gather from the community, this could be an opportunity to either share your decisions or seek more information from the community about the things you're contemplating. And also, some of the decisions will require reductions, and this is an opportunity to share ideas about service reductions with the community and get their feedback on those before we go into the next budget cycle. So then we have in June, before June, we should make a decision if we're going to move forward with the license tab fees. We would need to make a decision with a resolution from council before June so that we have time to implement that before next year, which is the timeline for that one. In November, we have 2 votes of the City Council that will be before you. One will be about property tax. Generally, we have that for the property tax levy. And in this case, it could also include the banked capacity. And then we have, of course, our budget discussions that we'll be having this fall, and a lot of these recommendations will be tied into the next budget cycle for 2027 and 2028. If we move forward with the TBD sales tax, which was proposed to be collected by 2028, the council would need to make a decision either in April or July, pending which election you would like to go forward with. So that we have the resolution in hand, and then we can go forward with all the different steps to put something on the ballot. And then around February 2028 would be the timeline for us to have a resolution in support of a Metropolitan Parks District so that we can form the district. One, hopefully the voters would vote for the district and then form the district and have a year to collect the funding. So we need that funding in 2030. So those are the steps, and we're all here to answer questions for you.
All right, we'll open the floor to questions, and I just want to inform the council, we're going to move to 3 questions, and then we'll move it to someone else instead of just a series of questions. I know the actual Roberts rule is 1 question per person, but we're going to introduce 3 if we get that, because I suspect we'll have lots of questions moving forward. anyone want to start off? Councilmember Sonmore. Oh,
to say something to the committee, so I had written something, and I just wanted to start out with that because it was really important for them to understand their importance of what they have accomplished here. So I wanted to provide a sincere thank you for our financial task force for their willingness to serve on our city's task force. Serving on this committee meant that your willingness to protect our long-term financial health, preserving the public trust. We are spending citizens' money, and we're doing the best we can with the best intentions. The task force was dedicated, and they donated their precious time. And I know how important that is, because when you come home from a long day at work, I always say this to all our volunteers, you could have just gone home and turned on the TV. You could have just gone home, gone to Costco, you know, that takes all night, fixed dinner. There's so much you could do, but you decided to help our city, and you decided to have comments. And so for that, I extremely appreciate your time. And there were some complex revenue projections and expenditure trends that you looked at. And with all of that, with your strength that you showed our community, your confidence with our planning and responsibility, and you're taking this very, not lightly, but I heard a couple of comments that were near and dear to my heart, is that you're looking at our most vulnerable in our city, and you're really looking at what it means to them. We had comments on the committee that some people cannot afford a lot of increases. And then we have comments too that our city needs a lot of help in certain things. And so you guys did it very tastefully, back and forth. And I so much wanted to get in there with the conversations, but I bit my tongue. But it's so hard because we care, right? So we want to have that opinion, and we want to protect everybody. But I just really want to say, I took these notes just so I wouldn't get tongue-tied, but I am already. But really, on behalf of our community, I really want to thank each and every one of you that spent that time. And it was months. And so I just hope that you take the education that you got to educate other people. And I know you were talking about going out in front of grocery stores, or we had the conversations of going to different committees and trying to get out there and educate people. And I think that's really important, because I just heard a conversation at work the other day, and they just assume cities do stuff, right? They just assume that a service is going to be there. They just assume certain things, but with that comes cost. So I just really want to let you know I appreciate each and every one of you. So with that, I'll stop.
thank you, Councilmember. Questions, comments, feedback from others? Councilmember Doyle.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, yes, thanks to you, task force members. This was a lot of work, and it was like a giant Sudoku puzzle, and you figured it out in a very equitable, interesting, community-minded way. So I appreciate that. And I really appreciate especially that you have members of your task force with a lot of economic diversity. I think a lot of times when cities make decisions, they're not always keeping those folks in mind. So I appreciate that. I was thinking about which is more regressive, the licensing fees from $20 to $30 or $40, or the increase in sales tax. And I feel like this is a bit of it's a rock and a hard place. It's, do you want peas or carrots? You're going to eat something you don't want to eat. And I don't know that increasing the sales tax is less regressive. I find that hard to believe in my head, because that's rarely the case. I think it's a matter of which is less regressive, and they're both regressive. And maybe I just need to think of it like that. It's not that one is necessarily more equitable or not. Of course, the more you buy, the more sales tax you pay, depending on what you're purchasing. And typically, flat taxes are not equitable. However, we're not talking $5,000 to $10,000. We're talking $20 to $30 or $30 to $40. And I worry that with the amount of goods most people spend in their budget, which maybe 15, 20% of what you buy is actually taxable, that what the increase, the 0.3% increase, will be more than the $20 that you might have paid if you just doubled that. That's my concern. As a pro, of course, the more you spend for sales tax, the more you're generating, right? The more you spend, the more you generate. but I'm not sure that's actually a better option. So that's more of a comment out loud, not like a request or a question. But and the one question I did have was, what I see obviously the perks of using all of the banked capacity. I wondered if there was a middle ground considered, and this is the solution for now, right? This is a solution for now, but what does this mean if we use this banked capacity now? What does this mean in 5 or 10 years, right? Because then we'll have used it, right? So I understand that sometimes in a family, a company, a city, you have to do the rainy day fund and use what you have. But I don't want us to have the same struggles in a few years and then not have the banked capacity because we used it all. So, but I understand that using it now is a tactic that we need to combine with like structural changes, as we need to right this ship right now before this ship sinks, for lack of a better analogy. I understand that. Like we're listing, let's write it right now. But what are the long-term impacts of that? So, sorry, that was a lot.
So starting with the sales tax, the Transportation Benefit District sales tax versus the license fee, and I would like to invite any task force members up who want to speak to this if you're interested, and talk about the discussions that we had. There were definitely some community members on the task force that had strong opinions about this.
I think part of our rationale for, as a group in a consensus, for not having the tabs tax or registration tax, whatever you want to call it, is that doubles it. And there are people that an increase of $20 this week that they have to directly pay is gonna break them. Whereas if you spread it out, it's not so bad, right? And there's lots of, necessities that you're not taxed for. So we did talk about that. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, 100%. That was what was talked about. A lot of people felt like you had at least some choice, even though I fully agree with it with flat tax. And the word progressive versus regressive taxation was thrown around a lot in our discussions. And yeah, we did our best to stick with what we thought were the best possible choices. We did run into the problem when you look at the dollars as well, just to add on, that the license fee does not close the gap nearly as much. And so they aren't exactly a one-to-one, unfortunately. And so we did run into, and this was talked about a little bit earlier, at the end, where we were trying to figure out, we've done all the ones that feel like these are the correct actions easily. And we're now getting to the point where the gap still isn't closed. And now what is the best of the options we don't like as much? And so we basically, when we did that, that was how we ended up going with the sales tax option, as that was as I recall, one of the last ones added to close the gap. And you'll notice it's in both packages, and I don't think anybody was happy about it. But it was what it was. We also did talk significantly about what you're talking about the not using all of the banked capacity for exactly the reason you're saying. And that was, we voted between the two. That's how we ended up with preferred and secondary, essentially. And majority obviously voted for preferred, but it was only majority. And so it was clearly people saw logic. I mean, I also see the logic in both ways. And if I could have raised one hand 60% and the other one 40%, I would have done that probably.
Sometimes we did do that.
Sometimes we did do that. Like we're saying,
we had codes.
Yeah, exactly. So that was talked about. But the problem with doing that is similar to the other thing, where it's like reducing that, not taking that full bank capacity means you have to do something else and stuff to close it. And so that's when you started to run into these other things that we didn't like as much, like the license fee, which certain members of the task force said would be a immediate hit from them from a sort of cash flows, like they're getting their paycheck and now $40 is going out instead of $20. and that's so much more of an individual paycheck, basically, that was a bigger problem. It got really complex, basically, is what it means.
And also, if you don't already know this, because if it hasn't been in anything, we did find out that you can't increase it to, say, $25 or $30. It's 20 or 40. There's no in between, which is weird, but that is a that's a state mandate. Is that correct?
I think it's an up to number. Yeah.
It was the other way around, but we did have that discussion.
Yeah, yeah.
And with the bank capacity, I want to kind of reiterate what Eric said, but also mention that for a lot of us, recognizing that the city is growing, it's not going to get any smaller. We were concerned about if we do drop one of the police commander positions, then you have less people sort of to manage a larger group of people, which could lead to frustration from officers, sergeants, and lieutenants, and so forth. And we don't want people to leave. I think most of us maybe are pretty happy with the police force, and we don't love the idea of them leaving because they feel like they don't have a good work-life balance.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, and a lot of this is just me thinking out loud now that I have you here. And, you know, it really is like a peas or carrots situation. Like, it's not going to be perfect, and I know that you all, you know, considered so much information and, like, subjective and objective data, for sure. And, you know, I hadn't thought about, you know, the sales tax increase. This is spread out over months, and the tabs is boom. I'm still concerned that overall the amount of money per year might be higher for the sales tax. If the millionaire's tax, I don't know what the bill number passes, at least there would be a sales tax exemption for personal hygiene products. And I think a few other things I can't think of. And I agree regarding the police commander. I think as our city grows, that would not be a good idea to cut that position. So, thank you both.
And Councilmember Doyle, I just wanted to add about the banked capacity. One of the things that our finance director, Sergey Salmonin, has mentioned several times, and I just want to reiterate that banked capacity is not the way that we save money for the rainy day. This is our reserve. Our reserve is the way that we save money for the rainy day, and when we can invest our reserves and make interest on that. The bank capacity is like when you overpay the IRS, it's sitting there and you're not getting any benefit from that. We haven't made a payment, but that's like the best analogy I can come up with. So, and that was made for a reason. The council, back in the day when we formed the RFA, decided that they wanted to discount the property tax because that was an expense we weren't going to have anymore. At the time, we didn't have a good understanding of our finances. And so I think that's where we are now, is we have a better understanding of where we are. And unfortunately, we need the money. So that's up to you to decide, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on that.
Others, questions, comments, feedback? All righty, I think Mayor Pro Tem is trying to jump in if nobody's going to jump in. Are you saying you want the floor? And yes, Councilmember Page.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, I've got a comment and also a question, a couple of questions. I guess I'll start with the comment because of what all of this kind of means to me coming to this point. You know, again, like everyone else, just want to thank you for your presentation tonight. And I'm going to try not to reiterate what everyone else has already said. But I think for me, I was thinking about this today a lot. And to me, I just want to give you a big thank you. And the thank you looks like this. You know, you answered the call to help the city. You're not accountants, you're not economists, you're not analysts. You know, you are in every way diverse members of the community. Good at what you do singularly, but great at what you did, you know, as a group. You opened your mind to change and, you know, you worked through the uncomfortableness of working on how to help this city fix their budget. You exchange ideas, as we've heard. Some of your ideas created, that I've heard, some deep questions and conversations, and some got blasted right out of the water, but you persevered, and here you are tonight in front of the city. I commend you for that type of bravery, because it took bravery to do this. It took bravery to present this to your peers, the community, in the engagement open houses, because you didn't know what to expect. And it took bravery to be here tonight and say, hey, look at what we've done. So the big thank you that I thought about coming home from work today is something that I think has been near and dear to me since I got involved in this city, and that was city engagement, community engagement. You showed our city what community engagement really looks like. And I think that if our community pulled you aside individually and talked to you about what you went through, you'll probably be able to tell them what it feels like. And maybe not all of it would be good, but you can have that conversation with them. I think that your presence and what you all came together to do, I believe, helped open the doors for our community wanting to be community ambassadors, as well as the number of people who jumped up to get involved in the City Academy because of what you did and what you jumped in to do. So my hope really is that our community, those that are here in person, those who are going to maybe view the meeting later, hopefully see it in MLT News or any other platforms that Sienna makes sure that it gets out on, will be motivated to hardly wait for their turn to be able to jump in to do something. To me, that's, out of all this stuff that we're talking about, to me, that's the most important thing. And the reason why I think this is the most important thing is because, there's a saying, right? It takes a village to raise a child. But as I was driving, I said, but if I could add something else to it, I've learned through this group here, it also takes a community to build a city, and I think that we really need to thank, the council in 2024, wasn't part of that group, for having the foresight to realize that in order to get this done, they realized they couldn't get it done by themselves because they don't know all the answers. The city staff don't know all the answers, and the community don't know all the answers. But collectively, they can earnestly get this done. So, thank you. That's my big thank you for you all. My question is this. One of the things that's in the memo talks about, and you talk about the commander reduction, and that came up, a few minutes ago, and how if you reduce the commander when they retire, how is that going to affect things? And one of the things that I've mentioned is we have to be concerned about if it would create an accreditation issue. And we talked about, in your slide, you talked about other positions that could do that. So the question I have is, has that already been explored, what those accreditation issues would look like? Because if so, then that probably shouldn't even be on the table. And the other question I have is, whenever I hear about budget cuts and we talk about 5%, I think someone said that it's not going to be all departments, but just certain areas. Have the departments who are potentially going to be affected if there was a reduction, or are all the departments right now in the city currently working on a reduction plan so that the city can see what that looks like, so that in the event, is it even going to work, for a reduction plan if we're only taking some or if we're doing all? Is that already in the works to present to you all?
Yeah, so the accreditation issue, we don't know exactly how it's going to affect us. If it's a potential for a loss of accreditation, there are only 30% roughly of police departments, sheriff's departments across the state that have accreditation. So it's a relatively prestigious group, but it also has the potential to affect our insurance rates, which is one of the things we have to factor in. It's really a span of control issue. I think it was mentioned a little bit earlier how many folks each commander are supervising or responsible for, and how that flows down, because you have to have a certain span of control in management, in the management field, regardless of whether it's the police department or anything else. As far as the reductions, we already have those numbers. Preparing contingency plans and know what those numbers look like. It's a 5% cut across the organization, but that doesn't mean each department will receive, receive reduced by 5%. Some may reduce by 2%, some may be reduced by 7%, but overall, the entire general fund, it'll be a 5% cut, 5% reduction.
I was a little confused. I thought we were looking at 5, whatever, but we're looking at the pie is 5%. Okay.
All right, other feedback, comments, questions? All right, I'm about to call it. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got 3 questions and a comment, if that's all right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, thank you so much for all the work that you guys have done and put into this. This is a tremendous amount. Someone that loves budgets and numbers and delves into it all the time. Really appreciate the amount of work and effort that you put in and the challenge that it is to be able to come up with solutions. Come back to my comment. That was part 1 of my comment. Some questions, though, that I'm interested in getting a little more information on. One is the service reductions, kind of following up on that conversation. So we looked at the 5%, which is a $1 million savings. So if 10% was would presumably be $2 million savings, right? So what would the actual impact of service reductions be? In other words, what services would be cut or reduced? And so how can we gauge, what, I mean, I'm assuming that based on 5%, we're going to be able to figure it out and be able to continue delivering services. But the 10%, so we decided not to go to 10% because that was too much. Why? What would the additional impact be, and who, which services would be reduced because of that additional 5%?
Yeah, so 5% essentially cuts all extracurriculars, right? What would be extracurriculars? When you go above that to 6 and beyond is when we start cutting positions. I also want to make the point that the 5%, 10%, whatever the percentage is over 2 years. So 5% is $1 million, but that's over a 2-year period. It's $500,000 each year. It's not all at once.
And so I'm curious if we had the conversation about, okay, so 10% would mean reducing positions, but then which positions, which services would actually be reduced?
So I understand where you're coming from, and we can talk about programs. I'd rather not in a public meeting talk about potential particular employees. So I think we would be looking at reductions in recreation, almost certainly. And I think we would be talking about reductions potentially in the city manager's office and in community development.
Can I chime in? Okay. So when we were talking about, when you just talk about numbers, it's no big deal, right? It's no big deal. 5%, 10%, that's nothing. But then we did have conversations about maybe not specific people, but specific jobs lost. And specific job loss to us meant several things. It's a human, could be us at our own job. And also it means somebody has to pick up the slack. And that person that has to pick up the slack might say, this isn't worth it, I'm going somewhere else. So then we got to hire somebody to replace that one job that's doing 2 people's jobs. And not only is it expensive to train people, but the whole onboarding is expensive. And so we did go back and forth with that. And I think we ruled out the 10% pretty quickly when we started really thinking about the human aspect. And I think some of us even mentioned that, maybe we should bring in some of those humans and say, how would you feel about losing your job?
Yeah, one of the other things I wanted to mention, I can't remember who said it exactly, but I want to be able to give proper credit. My memory from last July is a little foggy. Somebody, when we were going through the education process at the first two meetings, somebody took a look at the employees and the number of employees that were doing the jobs and kind of all the things that they had to cover, and said something to the effect of, I cannot believe how lean the city is today. And, sorry if I can't remember who that was, but it was an important comment, I think resonated with all of them.
Yeah, thank you. And that's, Ellen, you pointed it out exactly as far as numbers are just numbers, right? I mean, that's why I'm asking, what are the actual impacts to reduce services? And I think that's going to be important to define. I'll get to that in my statement later. Second question, Transportation Benefit District has specific restrictions, legal restrictions as to how those dollars can be directed, right? So the sales tax and the tabs, so the sales tax was $835,000, tabs were $315,000. So quite a substantial difference, as Councilmember Doyle was pointing out earlier. But both of them still have restrictions on how those dollars can be spent for transportation. I assume maintenance and operations, but it still has to do with transportation. So what we're looking at doing is cost shifting and being able to replace dollars that we're currently using for transportation and be able to use these new dollars, potential new dollars in the Transportation Benefit District for transportation, maintenance, and operations that's coming out of the general fund, and be able to reallocate those dollars that we're currently spending in other ways, correct? Okay, that was simple. Simple question. All right, but yes, but that was my second question, so very good. Okay, finally, property tax bank capacity. I know that's a challenging issue on so many different levels. A simple question, and then I'll come up with my statement later. Simple question, though, is what is the annual, I was looking through the paperwork and the recommendation, I couldn't see, what is the actual impact on the property owner? In other words, we're looking at doing tapping 100%, but that means what in dollar terms for the property taxpayer?
Well, we did that calculation and shared it with the task force. We'll pull it up here in just a second. That was the pavilion, yeah. That was a different topic. Carolyn's fine.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be, so I'll just lead into my statement then, if that's all right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And that's going to be an important number for us to be able to understand and communicate. So then that gets to my follow-up is the community engagement piece is going to be so critical, and I think a couple of key areas we need to concentrate on in that continued community engagement. I appreciate the efforts that were already done, but I think that was we have a lot more engagement, and I think Ellen pointed it out earlier as far as other communities getting beyond those people that just come to City Hall and figuring out how do we talk to the people that are actually going to be impacted, both on the side of potential reductions in services and on the other side on people that are impacted on their pocketbooks. And so I think we need to get in a lot more detail. And I'll just be very upfront with everybody from the beginning so that I don't catch anybody by surprise. I am very supportive of most recommendations, but I cannot personally support the tapping bank capacity, because I made a commitment to the voters when we put that before the fire district annexation before the voters. And the reason that we cut that back was so that we could get that passed, because we needed to. We could not afford, that was another budget challenge we were facing back in the day, is we could not afford to continue not being part of the fire district, right? And we needed our resident support to be able to get there. And so part of that commitment was to be able to reduce the amount of property taxes that we had been allocating to our fire district, contracting the fire district. So that's a personal commitment that I made to the residents to get that support, so I can't go there. But I understand why it was recommended. I mean, and so that, we talked about the bank capacity. That's how we got the bank capacity, is we reduced the amount we could have been collecting at the time, but that we are allowed the opportunity to come back and tap that, and that's what this recommendation is. So I appreciate the recommendation, and I certainly appreciate the challenge that we're under to come up with $2.4 million, well, $4.2 million, of which $2.4 million is the bank capacity. But I think we need to get more buy-in. So while I can't go there, we do need to get the buy-in of our residents. And so we need more community engagement to talk about that issue and be able to really make sure that they understand the trade-offs and how much. So that's when we talk about the number. We need them to know the number that they're going to be paying for more. But at the same time, we need to have that conversation about reduced services. So I think it's important for us to understand what and define, not individual jobs, but the services that are going to would be reduced by having to cut an additional, probably not only 10%, but 15 to 20% if we were going to make up for the bank capacity, right? So I think we need to have that conversation and define that, look, if we don't go to the bank and tap the bank capacity, that's going to mean a 20% reduction in services. And here are the services that are likely to be impacted and how that affects our community and our residents. Are we willing to go that far? I don't think we are, but we need to have that conversation. And then finally, on the Metropolitan Parks District, I think that's whole nother conversation we're going to need to have a lot of community engagement on, as far as whether this recommendation is just covering M&O, right? Maintenance and operation. That doesn't include capital costs. That doesn't include the rec pavilion. And those are all key pieces of a moving conversation that our community needs to have as far as how we're going to fill that. Thankfully, we have a little more time than we do on the initial piece of this, right? I mean, the initial piece we need to decide for this year's or this next coming budget, so this budget cycle. The Metropolitan Parks District is going to be, we have a couple of years, but we've got to give direction on what we want to do now as far as what direction we want to be going so we can prepare for getting it on the ballot in the next couple of years, because we need to have that decision made within the next 3 years. So that concludes my long-winded remarks. I apologize. Thank you for your time. But again, I really appreciate all the work that went into this. I think we've got a little more community engagement to get us over the hump. But great job getting us where we are and probably to the finish line, at least initially, for this first budget cycle. And looking forward to working together with everybody on the community engagement moving forward.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And it looks like we have comments.
Yeah, I do have those numbers. We were able to find those from one of the presentations we gave to our task force. So average home in Mountlake Terrace, just slightly under 600,000. And the impact would be $130 in 2027 and additional 130 in 2028.
Thank you for those numbers. I'm sure we will see them ad nauseum in the next couple months here. That said, point of clarification, wonderful example of having 3 questions. You can have as many questions as you want. At the end of the third question, we will check to see if another council member wants to jump in, because we are all brilliant at this table. We should spread that opportunity around. So Councilmember Matsumoto Wright was up next, and then it will be Councilmember Page.
Okay. So I want to thank the task force, because I know this was a heavy lift and it was a lot of time. And I'm glad that you decided to join this, because not every city does this. And I'm really proud that we decided to do this. And thank you. I've been through several tough times in the budget in the past. And I remember the first time we had to do the transportation, the $20 tab. And that was a huge, remember that? Oh my God, we had people in the audience so upset about that. And yet our streets were falling apart. And we had so many things that we had to do. And I could not believe that what we collected at that time actually filled our potholes and fixed our streets. We even did the chip seal within that small little budget. And so all our streets got fixed every year. And then we had to start saving we couldn't do the streets anymore because we were using it toward our town center and to continue to save and put money into our town center plan, our main streets, excuse me. And we're still using it for that. And we've always known that that was there for us to raise, to get more money for either town center, the main street, or our 56, which is really falling apart. And what other streets are there, 48th, 44th? You know, we know that. We all live here in the city, and we all drive those same streets. And so here, I'm looking at that, and I'm thinking, but it really is just enough money. And I like a lot of the suggestions that you gave us. And it's an eye-opener for some of the things that we never thought of. One of the questions that I do have is the Metropolitan Parks District, and I think I know the answer, but I want to ask it in public. And that is just for the city. That is not the whole thing that we're putting together with the other cities.
Initially, yep.
And I heard someone, maybe it was Ellen, that said that really every single one of you still want the pool. And yet that's going to cost us a lot of money, but we still want the pool. And maybe we're going to be okay with paying for that pool, which really makes me happy because we're famous for that pool. People come up here, they don't go to Linwood. My friends who live in downtown Seattle, and even, you know, how many pools are there between downtown Seattle and us? And they drive up to Mountlake Terrace, to our pool. And then they complain to me that there's no coffee shop nearby.
There's one at the pavilion.
Well, yes, there's that.
It's
but
good.
There's not an actual, anyways. But they're raving about the pool, even in the condition that it's in today. So we have a very famous pool that we don't want to lose. And I'm looking at some of these figures and what we need to pay for and so forth, and it's really a tug of war, actually. And it's like a regular person with their own budget and their house. You're saving for something, and you're almost there, and then the roof leaks. And then the refrigerator goes out. And all of these things, and that's what's happening to our city. We're trying to get some things accomplished. We're saving for this and that. But then I think we have more roof problems in this city than I've never heard. We finally got the police department roof fixed, and then we're now doing the library roof. And then I'm hearing that we have another roof over at the Lake Ballinger Center, and then we have a public works building that also needs a roof. So thank goodness this building doesn't need a roof. So anyways, thank you. I just wanted to just say that I know that it was a lot of work. It was a big, heavy lift, and I'm glad to see that some of the things that are important to the task force were things that were important to me and many, many of us on the council and the city. So that's all I have to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll move over to Council Member Page. I just want to give a shout out to Gen X for that knockwood.
Thank you, Mayor. And I did have a third question that I had missed. And this question really, the state is wrapping up their 60-day session. There is a lot of fiscal challenges that our state is going through, and things that are happening that we wish would happen, and things that are happening that we wish wouldn't happen. But this fiscal task force started last year, and we got our plans here, and I'm just wondering how well does this plan pairs with what's going on for the how well does this plan pairs with the state's fiscal challenges as far as revenue and expenditures, and how is that going to affect what we expect to be able to do with any of these recommendations?
So the recommendations that you have in front of you, there's not much interconnectedness between us and the state. There is in other areas, state shared revenues, gas tax, all those things that we have state shared revenues for. But as far as this set of recommendations, either one, preferred or alternative, there's not a whole lot of interconnectedness there.
All right, any other questions, comments, feedback? All right, seeing none, we'll just end with mine. And I think mine's more of feedback, and I'll also echo the thank you so much for all of the work that you all have done, including our consultants. I will say, in the spirit of context, this decision to go in this direction, as in having a task force and a consultant, wasn't necessarily something we all agreed with, but I think you can hear there's a resounding, we're so glad we did, which just means that this could have failed. It most likely would have failed in other circumstances. So thank you all very sincerely for your leadership through that and your partnership through that and your time given up through all of that. And of course, we're really disembarking upon this. So I hope that you remain in this and if nothing else, keep us accountable to make sure that we're holding true to all this work that you've done. I have seen us drift in the past. That stated, I do want to point out, and this is more for the general public, and maybe the folks in this room as well, that what we're looking at when we talk about these strategies and these shortfalls really are if nothing else changes, which is why I always want to remind us, and I will say I had the honor this week, I believe that was this week, of having our interviews, and I was in this very room for our hopefully soon Community and Economic Development, whatever title we end up giving, but new lead. Which is to remind us that those positions matter. All of the code cleaning up that we're doing, both at the city level and they bring it to us to agree to, and the changes that we're asking them to make, all of that matters in terms of us making sure that this city doesn't look exactly the same in a couple of years from now. Of course, none of that is really within our control in the bigger scheme of it all, because we have 3 projects ready to go that will genuinely change the makeup of this city. It will take us from small city to medium-sized city. We'll cross the 25,000 person threshold. And they can't get their funding, which is just my way of recognizing that's why we don't budget off of what could be, we budget off of what is. But do want to remind us that this isn't a separate process, that we continue the efforts to get community and economic development in this city. That's not just buildings, that's also bringing in the businesses, getting other people to stop driving past us and stop and use the businesses that are here now, not just the ones that they're aware of. We have a lot of hidden gems throughout this city. But again, just kind of reminding us that this isn't as bleak and as painful as it possibly could be, because we are a city that is, as I heard one of our candidates say, on the brink of something big. I genuinely believe that to be true. That said, and with all that in context, looking at any of the strategy packages, if things were to change, and I'll just say if the 3 developments that we are aware of just within the town center were to come in, would any of these strategies be able to be repealed, or are these things, once we set them in motion, they are runaway trains and best we could do is keep them on the track?
Get back to that slideshow here. Oh, yeah, I got it. So some of the things that are recommended here, and I'm looking at the preferred strategy package, but really this applies to all of them. Updating the internal cost allocation plan, something that we need to do regardless, as far as reducing the software subscriptions, also something we need to do regardless. The historical budgetary savings, what that essentially comes down to is this is what I need for to accomplish the goals that I have for this year. Let's add 5% to it. So I make sure I have a little bit of cushion, so that eliminating that, we would do that regardless. The reduction of general fund expenditures, I think, is one that could be brought back. But again, depending on when those developments happen, costs continue to increase. So at that point, it's a maybe. At that point, the fleet and revenue, or fleet and equipment maintenance revenue, I think is a good idea anyway, to continue to do that. The other 2, the Metropolitan Parks District, That's just a service delivery model that many communities are going to because parks are so valued, regardless of their budget situation. So it's an idea, you know, that has seen success in various areas throughout the state, and I think that's something that you know, is one of the things that should be pursued from my perspective. Yeah, those are the ones that I can see here as far as the sales tax or the car tabs. Once you do that, I'm not aware of a mechanism to repeal it. I'm sure one exists, but I've never seen it.
Perfect. Thank you. Just wanted, again, folks to recognize that this is if everything stays static, and there are other things we can be doing that are not on this sheet that will have an absolute impact on us closing that gap, if not thriving, dare I say. That said, thank you all for your time and your energy, and we will let you go, which is to say we're going to go ahead and move forward now to number 5, which is the presentation of options for short-term housing rentals, and that is with our Community and Economic Development Department. We are going to adjourn for 5 minutes, and that would put us back here. Let's just make it 7. We'll be back at 7:45. 7-minute break. All righty, we're back in session, and we are at number 5, presentation of options for short-term housing rentals. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. My name is Matthew Gissel. I'm both blessed and honored to be your building official here at Mountlake Terrace for our amazing community. There's been a lot of questions about short-term rentals. Laura, with code compliance, has done some amazing work doing some research on how we currently process them and what neighboring communities are doing. We'll end with some options and how we can move forward and bring you more information if needed so that you can make decisions.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and members of council. My name is Laura Stevenson. I'm the Code Compliance Officer for the city. This evening, I'm presenting an overview of short-term rental policies, including our current practice and examples from other jurisdictions for council's consideration and direction. We'll go over the definition, our current practice, policy options, direction, and questions. So short-term rentals are residential dwellings or any part thereof that are offered for rent or occupancy for a period of less than 30 consecutive days in exchange for compensation. Short-term rentals include but are not limited to dwellings advertised or booked through online platforms or available through direct arrangements with the owner. This does not include hotels, motels, or similar establishments which are subject to separate licensing and inspection requirements, and any rental exceeding 30 consecutive days is not considered short-term. This is the state's definition of a short-term rental. The state does not regulate short-term rentals. However, it provides local municipalities with the authority to regulate them through zoning and business licensing. The Snohomish County Health Department oversees licensing and inspections for hotels, motels, inns, and similar establishments that operate 3 or more units. Properties with fewer than 3 units are generally not subject to health department licensing. Currently, short-term rentals are treated the same as long-term rentals. We don't distinguish between the two. It's twofold. The owner or manager must get a business license with the state with a city endorsement, and they must also pass a safety inspection, which requires a permit. These are some options, 3 of which are utilized by other municipalities. Ours is the third one. So it includes some code changes specifically that regulate short-term rentals at the minimum to define what they are, at least in our code. There's also the option to cap the numbers allowed within the city. We can keep our current standards, or there's the option to prohibit them altogether. This is the first option. It would be to adopt the code or codes that specifically regulate short-term rentals. This is just an idea of what it would look like. They would have the same requirements as we do for any kind of rental currently. And then in addition to that, we could look at some items like limiting it so that you can't use it as a party or an event space, or being able to inspect upon guest complaint for safety reasons, obviously, and limits to 1 short-term rental per parcel owner as in an individual or entity. That would prevent like a bigger conglomerate from coming in, buying a bunch of properties for the sake of turning them into short-term rentals. And then we could even add something like maximum guests per site. This is just a summary of what Lake Stevens does. So it includes a lot of similar points that we have, including smoke detectors, also requires a specific permit, and they limit rentals to either the house or ADU, but not both. And they're required to have a posted list of emergency contacts. And the list continues here. And then if we look at Everett, again, not dissimilar from our current policies, but it adds some restrictions such as maximum guests on site and no signs allowed to advertise the rental. Another option would be to cap the amount of short-term rentals allowed within the city. This is more common in tourism-driven communities, but it would be worth consideration here, particularly as light rail access increases marketability. One policy concern often cited is preservation of long-term housing supply. So, because the short-term rentals will obviously eat up that inventory. And I should point out that our city attorney, Hillary Evans, is not on board with caps. She said they become messy once caps are met, and it's akin to regulating noise complaints. So White Salmon, Washington, they have a cap policy in place. This is directly from their website. They limited short-term rentals to 10% of all housing units, which in their case is 122. Vancouver has a pilot program. I don't think it's been fully integrated yet, but theirs is to put a limit to 1% of housing units that can be used as short-term rentals. And they do this by having permits available only to a certain amount, and then once they reach 870, then they no longer allow those permits. So we already went over option C, which is just what we currently do. Option D, very rarely done, would be to eliminate short-term rentals altogether, to ban them from the city. Yeah, most of them that I've seen are in very affluent small towns, not necessarily our situation. So regardless of which path is chosen, this is an area where there's exponential growth. It's come up, it'll come up again with even more frequency. I'm here for direction on whichever way council would like to proceed.
Thank you kindly. Questions, comments, feedback? Councilmember Sonmore.
One is just to understand something. It was with Lake Stevens. It says.
You have to turn the mic on.
Max 2 rental parties at a time, unit must be permanent. So I had a girlfriend that had a bed and breakfast. She had a 3-story house, so she could have guests on each level. And so I'm assuming that's kind of, so if I had a house, I could have 2 parties in there at a time?
Yeah, I think once you get to 3 or more, then the health department gets involved.
So I'm just thinking of cars and different things. And then my last question is, how much money would generate from this, and would it go into the hotel motel?
At this point, there's no money generation involved with this presentation. The state is looking at potentially adding a tax that would specifically go towards short-term rentals.
So what would happen, what would happen if you found out somebody had a rental and they didn't have a permit? Is there a violation? And how are we going to enforce that? Because I'm assuring that would be maybe on your plate.
Yes, it would be exactly how it is now, which is when we find out that there is a rental property that doesn't have a rental business license, which are required for all residential rentals, then in single residences, which is we tell them that you need to have a rental business license, and that requires to be registered with the state and to have a safety inspection done.
So can I just follow up then? How much would that business license be, and how many people are using that now?
I believe the business license is somewhere between $100 to $200.
It would be yearly, I'm assuming, or?
With the state, yes. So that's with the Department of Revenue.
Right.
Yeah. For us, we have a rental inspection, I believe it's $62.50 for the permit, and that covers the inspection.
A rental unit. I know we used to have a rental program, but I don't think we're using it.
Yeah, that's still in force. The residential rental inspection program.
So how many
is being done. We can get you that data.
So you are actually just picking random houses or apartments to go into?
We are not, no. Per the residential rental inspection program, you have to have an inspection on a single-family residential that's acting as a rental to make sure it meets the minimum safety criteria. If you're talking about an apartment complex, then there is in the criteria a certain percentage of them that we do inspect to make sure that a percent of them pass. If a certain percent do not pass, then it can grow to the point that we inspect every single unit.
Is that in conjunction with Snohomish County? Because we had some issues with mold, and we had renters renting, and we had their landlords that wouldn't fix the mold, and that's why we started one of the inspection program.
Yeah, and about 3 years ago, we had residents, actually the school district, reach out to us letting us know that their children were in an apartment complex that had some water issues and some mold. And through the residential inspection program, we did work with them. They remodeled the entire unit, resolved the issue. So that is still the main methodology that we use, and that's all internal to the city of Mountlake Terrace.
And we do a certain percentage each year, you said?
Correct.
Is that like 10%, 5%?
I would have to double check the code. I don't have it in front of me, but it's a total percentage of the number of units that are available.
So we're expanding so much here. So will your count then go quite a bit then with all the apartments that we're going to have here in rental units?
The number of inspections? Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, and so one of the things that we're finding is we don't have adequate data on long-term rentals and short-term rentals because it's the same process. So one of the things that we're looking at for one of the recommendations is to, on our intake forms for those inspections, for them to identify if this is a short-term rental or long-term rental. So that way we can provide you with more accurate data on how many short-term rentals are in Mountlake Terrace. But as we've gotten more complaints of things of that nature of short-term rentals, we want to bring it to you early so that way we can look at it from all the different angles to see what direction that you would like us to look into so that we're best utilizing our time, not looking into all the options So that way we can bring you the most available data on the ones that you're looking at moving forward with.
Opened up another question. What kind of complaints are you getting?
Usually we get complaints once things have kind of gone off the rails. So we have a lot of examples. One comes to mind where there was, I believe I've talked about this in front of council before, there was actually sewage, raw sewage running underneath a house, and the rental business license and inspection program, that's how we really got in, because it was tenants living there, and they were living in really rough conditions. And once we told them that they needed a rental business license, then we were able to actually help the tenants because they were able to leave. In that sense, like, because they knew that it wasn't licensed, they were able to leave that lease. That's not something that we necessarily tell people that we're able to do. It's not something that the city does, but that's one way where it's become really prevalent. But we get complaints of things like, there was a major leak and my landlord won't fix it, stuff of that nature. Or my landlord's using this space for something that they shouldn't be doing. I've had that one as well.
That's wild.
As well as garbage and other short-term rentals. One of the reasons we're coming to you is because they're unique in how they operate. So a tenant, it's not like a long-term rental where we can work with them, we resolve the issue, and because they're continuing to stay there, it's over. It's more tenant turnover. So our current methodology, by the time we engage our code compliance, that temporary tenant that was there for the weekend or whatever is now gone.
Let's do one last one. Go ahead.
I'm trying to get them together. Would it protect that citizen more if they're doing a short-term rental, if they have a business license? Because, you know, you talked about breaking the lease. I'm thinking, well, I'm sure they probably would have a contract, but when I think short-term, I'm thinking just a couple of weeks, 2 weeks. I was thinking, you know, too much parking issues and leaving the house a mess and.
Sorry, of course, yeah, the complaints that we get the most about short-term rentals have to do with parking, garbage, noise, parties. Those are complaints that we get quite a bit about them. We have had a situation where somebody had a house fire. They went through one of the websites available for a short-term rental. They went into that house and recognized immediately the points of egress are incorrect here. This is another fire hazard. They contacted us. We contacted the owners of the place and let them know, hey, you need a rental business license. They decided to sell in this case. It would have been, they actually would have had to do some work to that house to make it safe as far as rental egress goes. It's just one situation for short-term rentals.
Interesting. Other questions? Councilmember Page.
Yeah, I guess kind of to help my confusion. So currently in the city, we don't recognize short-term rentals. Everything is a residential rental business.
We treat them the same. They're not specifically identified in the code. We don't have a definition for short-term rentals. It's just rentals.
Okay, so when you refer to, like just a couple of minutes ago, short-term rental situations, how do we know that they're short-term? Is there any way for, how do we know that they're short-term rentals?
Yeah, so usually the neighbor will let us know, or whoever's reporting, whether it's the guest, the neighbor,
okay,
stranger. Whenever they let us know about it, first thing I do is I check the websites and, oh, there's that property. They're right there. So that's confirmation.
Okay. So based on your experience, you know, because I have a Airbnb that's like on my street, you know, and that, so I've always wondered, you know, where do they fit in? And so how many, from your experience, short-term rental situations do you think are going on in the city?
I would estimate between 20 and 50 at the moment. That obviously is going to go up. considering the light rail and the World Cup. But I did find a site that actually does a count, and the last count was 28. That it's a site that's utilized for people who want to invest into short-term rental properties.
And of that estimate that you have, how many of them you think have like a residential, or do they have nothing at all?
Unfortunately, at this point, because we can't signify the difference between the two, we just have the total number of rentals in Mountlake Terrace.
Okay.
So unless we went through and actually figured out those exact addresses and then went to the resident business license for rentals, which would take a lot of bandwidth, we could do that if that's something that you'd like us to look into. But again, that's rough estimates based on a third-party website that found that information.
How many questions have I asked? 2.5. Okay, here's a half question then. So what is the, what does it do for us? And it's probably an obvious answer, but what does it do for us to separate it?
Yeah, so it does a few things. One, it gives you data to see if you want to put special regulations on it. One of our biggest concerns is life safety, as well as maintaining the neighborhood's identity and specific characteristics. So our current code that we have does not allow us an opportunity to really go in on a regular basis to make sure if the aesthetics are being changed, if it's operating in a way that's hindering the neighborhood, to be able to communicate with them. One of the things that I'll let Laura speak on is a lot of these houses that are owned, they put the owner information of contact at the residential that is being a short-term rental. So when we're trying to contact them, let them know something's wrong, obviously they're not checking that mailbox, and neither is the people that are renting for the day. So it makes it very, very hard for us to make contact to actually get the actionable items taken care of. So if we did identify them as short-term rentals, one of the things that we would be able to do per Laura's research is make sure that we defined either the management company or the owner-specific information, not the resident that's being rented, so we can make contact.
Yeah, I would say one of the points that one of the other cities made, I believe it was Lake Stevens, was to have a sign, like for an emergency contact sign that gives like all the relevant information that's posted for the guests, for the city, for any kind of services, to be able to actually contact the owner. There is like a backdoor way of trying to say that you are a owner resident by putting your own address in with the assessor's office, when in reality, they don't actually live there. But again, it makes it next to impossible to actually track the person down.
All right, other comments, feedback? Councilmember Doyle.
Thank you. I was thinking about, it sounds like the very first thing we need is more data, like how many short-term do we have and how many long-term do we have, right? Because I've been thinking about this because I was thinking about House Bill 2559, and then I went on VRBO and Airbnb, and of course it's not like tourist season right now, but I am curious in July and August, right, how many we have, because I was thinking of it in terms of the lodging tax and like revenue possibilities if that bill passes, which is still to be determined. But it seems like regardless of that happening or not, it would be, I think it's good to get a handle on this, especially as the city grows. I think it will definitely have more of these short-term rentals, and just having rentals is not specific enough data. So like the first step is like to do a proper assessment, and it might be painful to talk to everyone who currently has a rental, but I think it would be worth doing just to know what we actually have, because it seems like we don't have a way of knowing what we actually have as a city right now. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other, oh, please. Oh, I wasn't looking, sorry. Councilmember Matsumoto, right?
Well, I would like to see us differentiate between short-term and long-term. and it's 30 days or less, and a lease, it's over a year is a lease that has to be recorded. But I know that people sometimes use short-term rentals for several months. So they're going to kind of be in there. You have a short-term rental in a neighborhood, and it is very different from a long-term rental because you have different people coming in every week, every few days. And in a neighborhood like ours, we all look out for each other because we're a triple cul-de-sac. And if we see a strange car, we start looking because we're looking out for each other. And and to my knowledge, I don't think we have a short-term rental in our neighborhood. But I've always wanted to know, and I know we have one a few blocks down because on Facebook Community, was it? They asked if anybody had time to help them out with their short-term rental cleaning. And they'll pay you X amount of dollars to help them out with it. And that's when I first realized that, oh, Mountlake Terrace has short-term rentals. But again, it is basically a hotel. Overnight, 2 nights, whatever. And I know the clientele is a family. If they had to rent a hotel, they'd have to rent several rooms. And then if they had little kids, then they have to have some place for them to play and so forth. And I first found out that why they even exist is when my nephew came with his 3 kids, and they didn't fit into my house, along with auntie and uncle, and so they all went and rented a short-term rental in Linwood. And boy, that's the first one that I've ever seen in my life. And the condition of that house was so bad, I just could not believe it. And I hope that Linwood did something about it. I did not call anybody. But that's when we really need to know who they are, what they are, and we need to start inspecting some of these, the long-term rentals once a year. Short-term rentals, I don't know how often. But if that house in Linwood is a sample of what some of those houses look like, I do not want anything like that in Mountlake Terrace. Also, if we do have short-term rentals, a percentage, 10%, because condos say no more than 10% of our units can be rentals. No more than 10%, because you don't want the whole city. Because at first I was not for short-term rentals because it takes away from actual renters who need a place to live. But again, there are investors, and they're looking for things, how to make money and so forth. And this is something that I've heard from so many people, how when they travel to other countries, even my son, when he was in Japan, in Tokyo, in Seoul, in Taiwan, they all stayed at Airbnbs. In Hawaii. There's a ton of them in Hawaii, and they're all trying to convince me that this is a good thing. But again, those areas are large cities, and tourists go there. I don't know if tourists come to Mountlake Terrace. They might.
Sorry, just one point on that. Just from reading through the descriptions of the properties, they really like highlighting the light rail. So it looks like a lot of business visitors.
We didn't have the light rail until a year and a half ago. So now
correct. But that is the big selling point right now for these.
And a lot of some of the VRBOs and Airbnbs, they're individual rooms in a house.
I was just about to bring that up because I found out from my friends that they are renting out their rooms.
Yeah, and so that's why we're coming to you early. With the middle housing that was just adopted, you can put 4 units on any single family parcel. So we want to make sure that we get ahead of this, so that way we have a clear expectation on the direction that we want to go, so that way our community knows what they can do with their property and how, and that way we can manage in a way that maintains the aesthetic of Mountlake Terrace.
So we are a city that is probably going to be high use of Airbnbs because of light rail. And during the World Cup, that's a whole different thing. That's once in a blue moon. But normally, in a regular everyday, people travel for business all the time, and many of them do not like to stay in hotels if they don't need to. And I understand that. I really would like to keep a lot of these for people who want to live there as a community member. But I understand, you know, because I go to the AWC meetings, and Leavenworth is always raising their hands about their rentals and Airbnbs and all of that too. So I know that, you know, my opinion is just my opinion, and there's the next generation and everybody else really loves to use Airbnbs. And so we really need to start thinking about this. I'm glad you're starting early. I'm glad we're even starting. And to figure out what to do before we start getting complaints.
Councilmember Sonmore.
I heard you say you wanted our feedback, and I know Councilmember Matsumoto Wright gave you a lot of feedback, so I was just going to follow up what she said too. Being a small city, I kind of like starting out with a pilot, and it sounds like you guys already have certain, since you've dealt with some of this, you have certain ideas that maybe you want to set forth in here, and so I was just kind of back some of that up, because with Airbnbs, I've been reading about how some people get scammed in certain ways, or there's there's all sorts of things. But I was just looking at some of them: maximum guest, pilot program, minimum off-street parking. But this all protects the residents, the renters, and the property owners. And if we're only 4 square miles, if we can kind of do a project or a pilot program on it and can cap the capacity, because like you said, the fire issues and having fire extinguishers or fire detectors and having the contact of the owner, I guess I was thinking that would just be a given. And sometimes, you want to protect everybody the best you can. So I'm appreciating that you bring this to us earlier, but I guess I always want to proceed with caution at something new, and we're so small, so sometimes it's hard to backpedal something that you put in place. But if you start out small and you gather your data and collectively put stuff together, it kind of can work out a little bit better, because like you heard the conversation, and what you brought up too, Laura, is we're light rail, and this is new, I mean, to our city, so it'd be interesting to see what you guys put together.
Excellent. Other feedback, comments, questions? Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, thank you really for bringing this to us. I think it is an important topic, and I agree with my colleagues. I think it's important that we go down this path and figure out, get some regulations in place. 3 questions. So let's see, I got to figure out how to do this in 3. But first of all, did I understand correctly that even if we do put regulations in place, that only allows us to regulate, that would not tax them? We would have no authority to collect a hotel motel tax on a short-term rental?
That is not part of what we're proposing with any of these options, no. But there is something coming through on the state side, so I don't know how we can maneuver ahead of that.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I'd say that even if we can, then we'd have to have something set up to quantify how many short-term rentals that we have and have a process if that does become available by the state, so that way we can integrate that into that option.
Okay, so currently, statewide, there is no legal option for collecting hotel motel tax on short-term rentals.
Not that I'm aware of.
Right. Okay. And I guess part of the reason for asking is because it would, if there was, and I guess even if they did pass it this session, it would probably take effect in June, which would be just in time for the World Cup, which leads to my second question, I guess, was timeline for all of this, for implementing all of this. Part of the, I guess, the interest would be having something in place if we were able to collect hotel motel tax, having something in place for World Cup to be able to, add to our hotel motel tax fund that we need so desperately for events in our city, right? So, but it sounds like that's kind of this is going to be a longer term process for putting something in place, and not something we're going to be able to take advantage of in time for World Cup. So timeline is my question.
Yes, I would say we don't want to rush it. The World Cup is a one-time event for a month. Currently, if people do want to rent their houses in Mountlake Terrace or a portion of the house, we do have a process for them to do that so that we can make sure it's safe. And we could adjust the intake on those permits if based on your recommendations to signify if it's a short-term rental or a long-term rental, while we're looking at specific regulations that we can bring back to you for short-term rentals.
And so timeline would be, best case scenario, if we would say, let's do this, would be what?
I'd probably say towards the end of this year, we'd be able to get it quantified in code and start that process.
Okay. And so that'll also, thank you, so that'll also give us time to figure out if the state legislature does authorize a tax, we'd be able to incorporate that into whatever our plans are at the time. So my final question is related to data. It was kind of, I thought it sounded like you had an answer that I missed, and so that's why I said, say that again, but we had to move on. So again, what data do we have as far as how many short-term rentals do we think we have in the city currently? And if we don't have that information, I would love to get that information, but you said based on other cities.
So I'll let Laura chime in on it. So she did some excellent due diligence and found that there's actually companies out there that rank how good it is to invest in that community as a short-term rental, how lenient their regulations are, and how many rentals are in that community to see if it's worth you putting one there. I'll let you.
So that website did not list Mountlake Terrace, unfortunately, but it does. There are websites that will just give you raw data, which tends to include, here's what this city's rules are, and here's what they're actually going to do with those rules. So basically just showing people how easy it is to get away with stuff. But there is a website, there's another third-party website that actually does a count of how many, for example, Airbnbs are there in the area, just so you know how competitive it is. And at last count, it said that there were 28. I wouldn't want to, 28 in live active listings in Mountlake Terrace. Okay. I would estimate it's close to 20 to 50, somewhere in that range. Some of the listings, you'll have multiple listings for the same house, like 3 different listings for 3 different bedrooms in the same house. So it's hard to put a hard fixed number on it. If you go and you say search Airbnb, you have to plug in dates to even see the different properties display. So it's a hard number to pin down, but I would say right now between 20 and 50.
Okay. Good to know. That's what I was looking for. So very good. Appreciated everything. Thank you. Look forward to continued discussion on this.
Councilmember Page.
This is I guess, Airbnbs, we stay at Airbnbs pretty much every time we travel. I know in Washington, there are thousands of Airbnbs. I'm not talking about all this other generic stuff. Airbnb is a corporation, right. And people that are listed through Airbnb, they are listed through Airbnb, and then a fee is paid to Airbnb when customers, use Airbnb. So what I'm hearing is that in the state or in the city that the Airbnb is doing business in, when they collect those fees don't come to the city at all? I mean, there's nothing.
No, they're a connection service, like Uber. So they're connecting a seller and a buyer together as an intermediary, but no, they're not. I don't believe that their tax money is coming here.
Because they're paying taxes to somebody probably, right?
Right.
Okay. I mean, it just kind of doesn't make sense that, I mean, there's this bundle of money, just saying 20 to 50 here, but, the probably hundreds of thousands in the state of Washington, and I just know that, and I know we keep saying this is a small city, 4 square miles, but, I wrote down, but we're going up. We're going up, and I know I've stayed in Baltimore and I've stayed in New York and other cities, and those Airbnbs, the first time I stayed in one that, like, one person told me like 25% of all of these apartments are Airbnbs, because they were condos and they're Airbnbs. So, I mean, when we start thinking about, well, this is a small community, but we've got ordinances that allows it to become a much bigger community. It's not going to be 4 square miles, because now you got to look at, this cube space versus this space. And that's where a lot of those Airbnbs are going to show up at, if this is not necessarily a destination city, but a stay through city to do other things. And, so it'd be really great. And who knows how many of those exist right now already, the condos that are actually Airbnbs and not homes, that are Airbnbs. So it'd be good to see it, to be thinking about where that is going on, in the city. Yeah. Looks like my deck. That's not me. All right. But that's, I just want to throw that out there,
Yeah, it's definitely more and more so a reality.
Yeah. I mean, we're prone. I think we are more prone to have it than we think we are. We got, like you said, the light rail. They're selling the light rail. They're selling, Terrace, Terrace Station. All those places are potential, could be potential Airbnbs where people are subletting, their apartments, because that's what they do in Baltimore. That's what they do in New York City, and that's what they do in Houston. So it's just something to think about.
Yeah, and it's always better to be proactive than reactive. So as we trust the process, and we are going to continue to grow to be a vibrant community like we are, and we build out our talent center, I think this is going to be an amazing place to be able to stay, visit our amazing restaurants that we have here, jump on the light rail, go see an event, come back, and be in an amazing community that I enjoy staying in. So.
Any other comments, questions, feedback? Seeing none, we'll end it with me, and let's see if I can do my own policy. 3 questions. First one, I'm going to phrase as a question action, which is, of the examples, and you didn't have to do it for tonight, but if you have not done this, did you actually call these cities and ask them, how is this going? That would be the first question.
I haven't yet, but I definitely will.
Yeah, so because it looks great on paper, but in the spirit of like, yeah, this doesn't work. Oh, man, we should have said. I would hope we can get some of that. Second one, I'm disappointed, I think is the right word to say, because I was in Olympia 2 sessions back when they were trying to get some regulations and taxable income around short-term rentals. So sounds like that didn't happen, but maybe it's happening right now. We just haven't heard because there's so many other things going on. But that said, I did hear you say that we have a permitting process currently. It just doesn't distinguish between long and short term, but we do get some money off of that. So I would just pause and say, if we do not, I would encourage us to at least have a social media campaign around permits. This one in particular, especially as we get closer, because I will tell you, you didn't get my money. I don't remember filling out a permit when I had left the country for 2 years. And I'm like, I guess maybe that wasn't a short-term rental, but I know I didn't sell them my house. So it's just one of those where I'm like, that was just ignorance on my part. There's so many things that I didn't know you're supposed to get a permit to put a fence up. I mean, there's so many things. So in this particular case, I would say this would be a good time to remind people who think that they're on a fast track to getting their money that, wait a minute, there's a process still that does give us a little bit of a piece of that pie.
Yeah, but sorry, as an aside, we no longer require residential fence permits. I know.
Oh, yay, then I didn't break that rule. No, actually, I did get one, but that's okay. I did it right, but that's all good.
I believe that was in 2024 that was.
Yeah, I did mine.
Removed.
All my fences fell down in the last couple of years, but nonetheless, that's great. But nonetheless, really, again, on the serious side of that, if there is a permitting process now, I would not be shocked that people don't know that. And it's not out of malice, it's just literally like the who knew type of thing, so.
Yeah, and we are engaging the community and doing some PR campaigns, and including some of our townhome facilities that we know are there renting and larger multifamily housing that currently do not have them, but will soon.
Excellent, wonderful to hear that. And then question 3, did you all get the direction that you need?
I believe we have what we need to work with. I am curious to know how council feels about caps specifically. Keeping in mind that, again, that our city attorney is not on board with them at all.
Looks like you got.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, my initial feeling is no. And I guess that would be my starting point. But I do recognize the potential challenge it has on the housing stock that does cause concern, but I don't think we in this city need to worry about that. But I guess I would say it initially no, and if we start to see that this becomes a problem, then we start putting caps in place, considering whether we want to.
Yeah, it would be great if everybody chimes in. So I see Councilmember Page.
You know, and I want to thank Mayor Woodard for one of the asks that he made of you, because one of the things that I wrote down when I was looking at your presentation was, when I was looking at the caps, my question that I wrote down was, how is that working out? You know, and that's what I would, before I could say yes or no, you know, those folks that have caps, are they getting close to the caps, or are they over the, are they there? How is that working out, and what is their fair? Because I guess my concern would be, you know, down the road, like you said, you know, Mayor Pro Tem says, well, for right now, but for that time period where maybe we're not here anymore, do we create a problem for the next people that come in our footsteps because we said we want a cap or we don't want a cap? You know, so for those cities, and not necessarily just in Washington, or you know, those that have those caps, how does that work out? How is that working out for them? And what did that, and how long did it take to get there? You know, that's how I would reply to that question.
Yeah, and I'd like to remind council, caps doesn't have to be just total amount of short-term rentals in Mountlake Terrace. Some municipalities limit it 1 short-term rental per parcel. So there are other ways that you can cap it so that you're not limiting the amount of available stock for permanent housing, that we would be more than happy to look in if it's something that you would want, if you're interested in. If it's not, we want to make sure that we're using our time as best we can. So it looks like at this point, we want to look at specific codes to regulate short-term rentals. We want to adjust our intake so that we can get some data on how many short-term rentals we have. And then I guess, again, to that question on caps, is that something you want us to provide more information on options, or spend more time and effort on regulating short-term rentals we will have and getting that extra data on how many we have?
So I've heard 2 chime in. Here's Councilmember Doyle.
Sorry, thank you, Mayor. I don't think caps are pertinent right now. I think it's premature to look at that. I would be much more interested in kind of looking back at the data and see what we have. Caps reevaluate in X number of years, but I don't see that even becoming a problem in the next 5 years, just off the cuff. So at some point, maybe, but I don't think we need that right now.
Councilmember Matsumoto Wright.
Yes, I know that another city was talking about 10%, but when you think about it, how many hundreds or thousands of units do we have in this city? And there's only 28 right now of short-term rentals. It's going to be a long time, even if you put it to 10%. That's still, a long ways to go. But if you don't have if you don't have a limit, it could go to 50%. So I really worry about the housing availability for people to live in this city. In a city like Leavenworth, there's probably 50% or more people who are renting out their homes and so forth. But in Mountlake Terrace, I don't think I'll get up there. Who knows what the future will bring, but not right now.
So you have your 4, but Councilmember Sonmore, if you wanted to chime in.
And just looking at what little I did, I've seen a boathouse on Lake Ballinger. I'm seeing what looks like sheds. I'm seeing what looks like rooms. And I'm seeing over $1,000 for 5 days. I don't know, it's got me kind of interested. I mean, that's why I'm thinking, it could be, and you said 4 units on properties now, and I can see people saying, oh, hot dang, this could be, I could retire early and I can, whatever scenario it is. But I just think it should be closely watched to begin with. It's new, and I don't have a lot of experience with Airbnbs, but you just never know, what could entail. So I'd be more for a cap.
Perfect. I think you have your direction.
It's pretty thorough, thank you.
If you wanted to know what I was thinking, I'm with Mayor Pro Tem. I don't think you need it yet. So, but keep an eye on it like everybody's pointing out. All right, thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you.
We're going to roll into number 6, which is the city manager's report, which we'll just start there.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and Council. Just 2 items to mention tonight. One, our first Community Academy session starts next Wednesday at 6 o'clock right here in this room. We have got all of our registrations filled. A lot of people excited to get started. So we will we'll host that next Wednesday. The other thing to report was for our Terrace Summer Nights series over the summer, we had a total of 48 applicants to perform at those events. That is a significant increase over what we've had in years past, and really shows the growth of the events we have here in our community, and something that we're really, really proud of. Happy to see that, and hope to provide great entertainment over the summer months. 2 weeks, I think, before we move the clocks forward, so start seeing a little bit more daylight in the afternoon, and people having a good time.
Outstanding. Questions, comments, feedback for the city manager? Seeing none, I will just ask mine, which is 48 is amazing, but we only have, I remember correctly, 4 slots? And so I'm wondering what the other 44, is there something we could do creative?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, Andrew and Jeff Betts are actively working on that.
Outstanding. I had no doubt they would be. I just want to make sure they knew they should be. All righty, so no other questions, comments, or feedback. We have a adjustment to the agenda. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, for catching that. We're now going to move to number 7, which is going to be a chance to review the agenda for the March 5th. It's actually printed out with our packet on your spot if you want to look at it there. I believe it's also probably somewhere on the website as well, but definitely here in front of us. So any questions, comments, or concerns about the agenda for March 5th? All right, seeing none, we will move on. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Didn't see you. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just clarification that the no action items, we're just doing reviews on these. We're not expected to actually vote on things like the interlocal agreements, et cetera. Great. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, and thank you for catching me. I didn't even look that far. You see where my head is. So I'm trying to get to number 8, council comments. Seeing none, we will go to number 9, adjournment. We are adjourned.